Hey everyone, tonight's stories come with one simple warning. The rules exist for a reason, and breaking them has consequences. Before we start, rule number 1, dim the lights, grab a snack and a drink. Number 2, like the video and subscribe. And 3, and whatever you do, watch till the very end. And remember, follow every rule, or else. Huge thanks to the authors for these horrifying experiences. Now, let's get into some true Reddit horror stories.
I don't look at paper maps anymore. If I can help it, I don't look at fields either, especially when the corn dries out in October and the stalks turn that pale bone color. My name is Phoebe. I'm 25, and until last month, I was a junior geospatial analyst for a subcontractor that works with the Department of Interior. Basically, I made maps. Most of the work is digital now, cleaning up satellite telemetry, correcting zoning lines for flood insurance, that sort of boring administrative stuff. It's good work, or it was. 3 weeks ago, my supervisor, a man named Derek, whose only personality trait is drinking stale coffee, called me over to his desk. He had a quadrant up on his monitor. It was a section of rural Appalachia, tucked away in a valley that technically shouldn't exist based on the elevation models we use.
Data corruption, Derek mumbled, tapping the screen with a pen cap. The satellite sweep from 09, 14, and last week all show the same thing, a blur. Just pixels, like someone took an eraser to the raw image data. I looked closer. It was a rectangular patch of gray in the middle of a sea of deep forest green. Maybe cloud cover? Reflection anomaly? For 3 separate flyovers over 10 years, Derek shook his head. The county records say it's BLM land, but an old deed says it's private agricultural. We can't publish the updated regional topos with a hole in the middle. I need you to drive out there, take the LiDAR drone, take the handheld GPS, get me ground truth, prove it exists. I was actually excited. Field work was rare. I packed my gear into one of the agency Jeeps, loaded up a cooler with sandwiches and energy drinks, and started the 4-hour drive into the mountains.
The spot was deep in the backcountry. I eventually had to leave the Jeep at the end of a login trail that looked like I hadn't seen a tire since the Reagan administration. The GPS on my dashboard had already given up, displaying a questioning circle, so I grabbed the heavy-duty Garmin handheld, my backpack, and the case for the mapping drone. It was a 40-minute hike through dense scrub, brush, and pine before the tree line abruptly stopped. It didn't taper off. It stopped dead like a wall. I stepped out of the cool shade of the forest and into the valley. This was the black spot on the map. The valley was bowl-shaped, surrounded on all sides by high, steep ridges that probably mess with radio signals. The sky above was a flat, heavy sheet of gray stratus clouds, diffusing light so there were almost no shadows. It was farmland, but it was wrong.
The soil was churned and dark, tilled into perfect rows that stretched for acres. But nothing was growing. No corn, no wheat, no soybeans, just acres and acres of dark dirt and patches of yellow, dying witchgrass. And the silence. That was the first thing that hit my chest, a physical pressure. In the woods behind me, there had been cicadas, squirrels, the rustle of deer. Here, silence. Total vacuum-sealed silence. I checked my equipment. The drone compass was spinning lazily, unable to find north. The GPS screen just read calculating, indefinitely. Great, I muttered. The sound of my own voice was shockingly loud. I started walking down the center path between the tilled rows, intending to set up the drone in the geographic center of the valley. That's when I saw the first one. About 50 yards out, standing on a crooked wooden post, was a scarecrow. It was fairly standard at first glance. Blue flannel shirt, faded denim overalls, a burlap sack for a head stuffed with straw. It faced away from me, looking toward the center of the valley. As I walked past it, I felt a shiver crawl up my neck. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm a scientist. But the proportions were unsettling. The arms weren't just sticks. They were padded out to look muscular. The hands weren't loose straw. They were white gardening gloves, stitched tight, fingers curled as if gripping something invisible. I kept walking. 100 yards further, I found two more. They were smaller, child-sized. They were positioned differently. They weren't up on posts. They were on the ground. One, dressed in a little pink dress stained brown by the elements, was seated on the dirt. The other, wearing a boy's striped polo shirt, was kneeling opposite her.
I stopped. I took out my binoculars and focused on them. Between them, resting in the dirt, was a tea set. It was real porcelain, cracked and filthy. "Who does this?" I whispered. It looked like an art installation. A really morbid, middle-of-nowhere art project. I pressed on, deeper into the valley. The topography was flat, making it easy to see the layout as I moved further in. And as I walked, the dread in my gut turned into cold, heavy lead. It wasn't just a few scarecrows. The fields were full of them. There were hundreds. And they weren't guarding crops. They were the crop. Or rather, they were the population. I reached what looked like the town square of this bizarre display. In a wide clearing of dead grass, someone had dragged out furniture. Old, rotting velvet armchairs, dining room tables, school desks, park benches. And the scarecrows were everywhere, enacting a silent, motionless pantomime of life. To my left, a family of four sat around a dinner table. The father figure had a burlap face painted with a crude, wide black smile. He wore a suit that was rotting off his straw frame. The mother wore pearls, plastic, cheap pearls, and her painted mouth was a surprised O. They had empty plates in front of them. To my right, rows of school desks held smaller figures. They faced a larger scarecrow at the front who held a ruler taped to its glove. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my primate brain was screaming at me that this was predator territory. Run, PB, run back to the car. But I had a job and I had a camera. I pulled out my DSLR and started snapping photos. Documentation. Derek wouldn't believe this without proof. The sheer effort required to haul this furniture out here, to stitch these hundreds of dolls, it was insanity. I moved through the park scene. Scarecrows frozen on rusted swing sets. A scarecrow walking a dog made of hay and wire. It was then I noticed the wind. The valley had been breezy when I arrived, a constant low draft sweeping down from the mountains. It rustled the dry grass and made the hundreds of flannel shirts and burlap sacks flap and snap. Wish, snap, wish, snap. It was the only sound in the world. Then it stopped. The wind just died. The stillness that followed was absolute. It was as if the world had held its breath. I stood in front of a park bench, about 5 feet away from a scarecrow dressed like an old man, complete with a flat cap and a cane. I lowered my camera to check the light exposure on the screen. I frowned at the reading. It took me maybe 2 seconds. I blinked, rubbing grit from my eye, and looked back up at the old man. He was looking at me. I froze. Before, his head had been tilted down, chin resting on his chest, looking at the ground. Now the burlap face was tilted up. The black, painted eyes, just erratic swirls of tar or paint, were fixed directly on my face. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Wind moved you. Obviously." But there was no wind. The air was stagnant and dead. I took a step back. "It's just gravity," I reasoned aloud. The stuffing shifted. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to leave, right now. I didn't care about the drone data. I turned around to head back toward the tree line. I looked at the schoolroom setup. All 20 of the quote-unquote children scarecrows were now standing. My blood went cold. I swear my heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. A moment ago, they had been seated at the desks. Now they were standing.
Their stick legs awkwardly braced against the metal chair legs, and every single painted face was turned toward me.
I didn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stared at them, eyes wide, burning. Nothing happened. They stood there, inanimate, bundles of hay and cloth. "Don't blink," a voice in my head whispered. "Don't you dare blink." I backed up slowly. My boot heel caught on a tuft of root, and I flinched, my eyes shutting for a fraction of a second in panic. Rustle. A sound dry as autumn leaves rubbing together. I snapped my eyes open. They were out from behind the desks, all of them. They had advanced maybe 3 feet. Their poses were stiff, jerky, like bad stop-motion animation frozen in time. One of them, a figure in a red sweater, was reaching out a gloved hand. It wasn't a prank. There was nobody pulling wires. I was surrounded by acres of open ground. The wind picked up suddenly, a strong gust that blew hair across my face. I gasped, waiting for them to rush me.
But they didn't. As the wind blew, shaking their clothes and rattling their wooden spines, they remained completely still. They looked like inanimate objects again. The life had drained out of them with the return of the air currents. I understood the rules. I didn't know how or why, but I understood the logic. Wind, safety. No wind plus eyes open, standoff. No wind plus eyes closed, move. I scrambled backwards, turning to run while the wind was blowing. I sprinted past the dinner party family. Their heads bobbed in the breeze, lifeless and limp. I made it maybe 50 yards before the wind died again. I skidded to a halt, spinning around terrified to leave my back exposed in the silence. Silence. Total silence. I stood there, panting, sweat stinging my eyes. I stared at the dinner party. They were 50 feet away. The father, mother, and 2 children. My eyes were watering. I needed to blink.
"Come on," I whimpered, begging the sky. "Blow." Nothing. One tear leaked out. The burning was unbearable. I winked my left eye, keeping the right open. Nothing moved. Okay, I can cheat. I swapped eyes, winking the right one. The father scarecrow shifted. It wasn't a run, it was a glitch. One frame he was at the head of the table. I winked. Now he was standing on top of the table, towering high, his arms spread wide like a hawk descending. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I blinked with both eyes in sheer reflex. Crunch, rustle. I opened my eyes. He was right in front of me. He was huge. Up close, the smell was overwhelming. Rotting wet straw, moldy fabric, and something else underneath. Something like copper and dried meat. His burlap face was inches from me. The painted smile was cracked where the fabric had folded. I stared into the painted swirls of his eyes. I couldn't look away. I locked my muscles, forcing my eyelids to stay up. He was frozen in mid-reach, his white gardening gloves hovering near my throat. I could see the individual fibers of the burlap. I could see stains on the fabric that looked suspiciously dark. The other scarecrows were moving in the periphery. I could feel them. Whenever I focused too hard on the father, the edges of my vision blurred, and the others, the school children, the swing set watchers, encroached. I needed wind. "Please," I whispered through clenched teeth. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. My vision was swimming. The silence stretched on. It felt like minutes. It was probably only seconds. The father's painted mouth seemed to be stretching. I knew it was impossible. It was paint on cloth. But the weave of the burlap was pulling apart, hole by hole, widening that black void. I couldn't hold it. My eyelids fluttered. I dropped to the ground. It was instinct. The second my eyes closed, I threw myself flat onto the dirt and rolled. I heard the swish of something heavy swinging through the space where my head had just been. It sounded like a baseball bat hitting a heavy bag. I scrambled up, eye snapping open.
The father was twisted around, his waist contorted an unnatural 180 degrees, looking down at where I had been. His gloved hand was buried up to the wrist in the soil. I ran. I didn't look back. I knew the wind was still dead. I knew that because I couldn't hear it in my ears, which meant every time I blinked, they were gaining. I tried to time it. Run, 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 blink. Shuffle thump. They were getting louder. It wasn't just one or two. It sounded like a stampede of dried husks. Run, 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 blink. Shuffle thump. I could hear the fabric rubbing against fabric, a dry, rasping, screeching sound.
I saw the tree line ahead, the safety of the forest, the boundary. I didn't know if they could leave the field, but I had to pray they couldn't. The scarecrows were rooted to this town, surely. I was 20 yards from the trees. The wind was still gone. My lungs were burning, crying out for oxygen, but my eyes were worse. I had tears streaming down my face, blurring my vision into a watery smear. I tripped. My boot caught in a hidden rut in the dirt. I went down hard, slamming my chest into the earth. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My eyes slammed shut in pain. I didn't open them immediately. I lay there, gasping, trying to suck in air. And I felt them. I felt the sun block out. I felt them standing over me. I heard the creaking of wood straining against fabric. I smelled the rot. It was suffocating. I felt a sharp, crushing pain clamp onto my right calf. I screamed, trying to kick out, but the grip was like iron. 5 rigid, unyielding fingers squeezed my leg, grinding the muscle against the bone. It felt cold, a stinging, dry cold that burned through my denim jeans. Something clawed at my boot, dragging me backward across the dirt, away from the tree line. "No!" I shrieked, thrashing blindly. My boot connected with something hard and wooden, sending a jarring shock up my leg, but the grip only tightened, pinching so hard I felt something in my leg pop. I waited for the end. I waited for those white gardening gloves to close around my neck. But then I felt a cool touch on my cheek. It was a breeze. Whoosh. The hand on my leg went limp. The impossible strength vanished instantly. The leaves in the forest ahead rustled. The high grass hissed. The wind was back. I scrambled to my hands and knees, coughing, and looked up. They were all there, a semicircle of nightmare figures standing over me. The father was in the center, his hand extended, inches from my air. The little girl in the pink dress was collapsed on the ground behind me, her white-gloved hand still resting loosely on my bruised ankle. But they were swaying. The wind was pushing against them, and they were just dolls. Floppy, lifeless dolls responding to physics. The malice was gone, replaced by the mindless motion of the breeze. I crawled. I didn't stand up, I just scrambled on all fours until I hit the underbrush of the forest. I clawed my way into the pines, scraping my hands on bark and needles until I was well past the tree line. Only then did I stand up and look back. They were still there at the edge of the field. They hadn't crossed the line where the grass turned the pine needles. They stood in a jagged row, swaying gently. As I watched, the wind began to die down again. The swaying slowed. I didn't wait to see if they would move. I turned and sprinted the 40 minutes back to the Jeep, moving faster than I ever have in my life. I locked the doors, threw the garment into the passenger seat, and peeled out of that logging road so fast I almost wrapped the vehicle around the trunk. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that burlap face, the father. When I got back to the office, I told Derek I found nothing. I told him the logging road was washed out and I couldn't reach the coordinates. I gave him the memory card from the drone, but I had wiped it with a strong magnet. I kept it in my toolkit first. I told him it malfunctioned. I quit the next day. I told him it was family issues. I've been living in the city since then, somewhere with streetlights, somewhere with constant noise, traffic, people, movement.
The doctors tell me the deep purple bruising on my calf is just a hematoma from the fall, but I know better. The bruise is shaped perfectly like a small handprint. It hasn't faded in 3 weeks. If anything, it's getting darker, turning a distinct shade of dead leaf brown. I'm writing this because I checked Google Earth this morning. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. The glitch is gone. The pixelated blur over the valley has been updated with a new high-res image. You can see the field. You can see the rows of tilled dead earth. But looking at the satellite image, zoomed all the way in, the arrangement is different. The furniture's gone. The dinner tables, the school desks, the park benches, they've been moved. They're arranged in a new pattern now, a pattern that spirals outward from the center of the valley. They're forming a line, a procession, and the line is heading into the woods towards the logging road. They aren't residents anymore. They're migrating. And this morning, looking out my 4th-story apartment window, the streets were quiet. The birds weren't singing, and the wind stopped blowing. If you see one, if you see a scarecrow where it shouldn't be, or a pile of old clothes in the corner of your room that looks a little too full, don't blink. God help you, don't blink. I should have realized something was wrong when they offered me $30 an hour to deliver food. Now, 6 months into this hellish job, I still tell myself that. But back then, staring at my maxed out bank account and the eviction notice on my apartment door, $30 an hour felt like a godsend. The only condition was that I couldn't quit for 3 years. 3 years of guaranteed pay would have solved all my financial problems. The interview was brief, really very brief. A woman named Cassandra sat across from me. The office smelled faintly of disinfectant, and there was another indescribable odor, something organic with a hint of decay. She didn't ask about my work experience or references. She simply pushed a contract onto the table and pointed to the signature area. "The pay is very good," she said in a flat, professional tone. "This job is demanding. You'll encounter some seemingly unusual situations. Follow the rules strictly and you'll be fine. Are you okay with that?" I signed. Looking back, I can't believe I signed without even reading the pay terms. On my first day at work, I arrived at the warehouse in the east of city. It was a massive concrete building with no windows, only a steel door. The fluorescent lights inside blared, making my teeth ache. A supervisor named Marcus Bain handed me an insulated delivery bag, a company phone, and a small red booklet. "Read this," he said, tapping the booklet with his nicotine-covered fingers. "Read every word. Carry it with you at all times. Follow the instructions strictly. No improvisation, no shortcuts, no exceptions." The booklet was titled First Class Courier Delivery Procedures Manual. The cover was made of some kind of leather, unsettlingly warm to the touch, as if it had just been taken from a living creature. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, flipping through densely packed rules, each one more outrageous than the last. Marcus grabbed my wrist. Despite the damp, stifling heat in the warehouse, his hand was icy cold. "Eric, right? I need to make this clear. This job pays so much because it's abnormal. You signed a contract. You can't quit for 3 years. So you only have 2 choices. Either follow the rules and keep your job, or ignore the rules. Well, I haven't seen anyone ignore the rules in 6 months. I don't know what happened to the last one. None of us know." Before I could respond, he released my wrist and walked away. For the next hour, I sat in my car reading the manual, my stomach tightening with each page. The company's slogan was in Boston red on the inside cover. "We deliver for any living thing." I thought it was just a marketing gimmick. I was wrong. My first order arrived at 2:47 p.m. The company phone rang and an address appeared on the screen. St. Agnes Hospital, 13th floor, room 000. I pulled up the building information. St. Agnes Hospital had been abandoned for 15 years after a patient murdered 3 nurses and a doctor before hanging himself in the pediatric ward. This hospital only has 12 floors. I opened the brochure and found a section labeled Hospital St. Agnes, my hands trembling. The instructions were very clear. Park your car on the loading dock at the back of the building. Never use the main entrance. Enter through the service door. The door is open. If the door is locked, leave immediately and report to the dispatch center. Use the stairs to go to the second floor. Do not use the elevator, even if it appears to be working. On the second floor, find room 666. Knock 13 times, wait silently for 30 seconds. Find room 333. Knock 13 times, wait silently for 30 seconds. Return to the stairwell. You will find a new staircase leading upstairs that wasn't there before. Don't be surprised. Don't look back at the corridor you just left. Go up this staircase. It will be completely dark inside. Do not use a flashlight or your phone's light. Walk steadily upwards. You might hear breathing sounds that aren't yours. Keep going. You'll feel a noticeable drop in temperature. When you see your breath condense in front of you, you're almost there. At the end of the stairs is a door marked with the number 13. Open that door. Place the delivery bag on the floor inside the threshold. The floor might feel strange under your feet. Soft, warm, and slightly pulsating. This is normal. Don't investigate it. Put the bag down and leave immediately. Don't look into the room. If anything speaks to you, don't respond. Run down the stairs as quickly as possible. Once you reach the second floor, the stairs behind you will disappear. Leave the building immediately.
I read the instructions 3 times, hoping to understand something. It still didn't work. The delivery bag contained only one meal, a nearly raw steak, soaking in blood. The smell made me nauseous. The St. Agnes building looked like a tombstone. The lower floors were covered in graffiti, several windows were shattered, and shards of glass glistened in the dim afternoon light. I parked my car in the loading area as instructed, and the silence became suffocating the moment I turned off the engine. No birdsong, no traffic noise, nothing at all. The back door was unlocked, as expected. The rusty hinges screeched as the door opened, echoing in the empty hallway. A stench hit me. Mold, decay, and beneath it all, the smell of rotting organic matter I detected in Miss Cassandra's office. I switched on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the darkness, and found the stairwell. Peeling paint was everywhere on the walls. As I climbed to the second floor, I swear I heard footsteps moving upstairs, the sound perfectly synchronized with mine.
The second floor hallway stretched endlessly in 2 directions. The emergency exit signs flashed a sickly yellow. I first found room 666. Its door was painted black, unmarked except for a brass number that seemed to gleam in my flashlight beam. I knocked 13 times, my knuckles echoing like gunshots in the silence. After the 13th knock, I heard something moving inside. A massive object, dragging itself across the floor with a wet, scraping sound. 30 seconds felt like 30 hours. I stared at the timer on my phone, watching the second hand tick by while the thing behind the door continued its slow movement, drawing ever closer. When the timer showed 30 seconds, the thing suddenly stopped moving. Room 333 was at the end of the corridor. I walked towards it, only to find my footsteps no longer echoing. The sound seemed to vanish into the surrounding air, as if the hospital had swallowed all my noise.
I knocked 13 times on the door of room 333. This time, the response was completely different. A child's clear, bright laughter echoed from the room. Then another child's laughter joined in. Then a third. Soon, dozens of children's laughter came from behind the door, their voices layered, distorted, and rising in pitch until they finally merged into a piercing scream that made my ears ring. I ran back to the stairwell as instructed, following behind without looking back, even as the laughter reverberated through the corridor like a living thing. The stairwell door slammed shut behind me, and I found myself in complete darkness. My flashlight was still on. I could see the beam cutting through the air, but it illuminated nothing. The darkness swallowed the light like a black hole. Then I saw it, the new staircase leading upwards. I could see it because it was deeper than the surrounding darkness, like a negative space in the void. I put away my phone and began to climb upwards in the darkness. From what was probably the 5th floor, the sound of breathing filled the air. My breathing was slow and rhythmic, like some enormous creature drawing air into lungs that shouldn't exist. It came from all directions, from above, below, and even from inside the walls. I continued climbing, one hand gripping the railing, the other clutching the takeout bag tightly. Around the 20th step, my breath began to condense into mist. The temperature plummeted. My fingers went numb. My breathing grew louder and more rapid as if the source of the sound sensed my approach. Something brushed against my shoulder, cold and damp, feeling like fingers made of ice water. I suppressed a scream and continued climbing. A door suddenly appeared before me, marked with the number 13 in brass, emitting a faint, sickly glow. I flung it open. The floor immediately felt off. The brochure had warned me, but the reality was completely unexpected. The floor was hot, almost feverish, vibrating slightly under my feet in rhythm with my heartbeat. The touch was like stepping on bare, untreated muscle tissue.
I dropped my bag and ran, afraid to look into the room, though I glimpsed something large and pale moving in the darkness outside the threshold. As I ran down the stairs, I heard wet chewing sounds from upstairs, accompanied by groans that could be ecstasy or agony. I ran until I reached the back door and rushed into the loading area before stopping. The sun was setting, and the city was returning to its usual hustle and bustle. The phone buzzed. Delivery confirmed. $87.50 has been deposited into your account. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trembling, before finally being able to drive away. The second order that made my impression came 3 days later. At 11:47 p.m., the phone rang. Blackstone Castle, door-to-door delivery. I opened the brochure with trembling hands and found the relevant section.
Head to the warehouse stables. Yes, we have horses. Choose the gray mare named Patience. She knows the way. Load the goods into the saddlebags. The castle cannot be reached by car. You must ride a horse. Follow the path behind the warehouse. It will lead you through the woods. The entire journey will take approximately 40 minutes. Do not stray from the path. You may see figures in the woods. They will call to you, and sometimes you will recognize their voices. Do not respond. Do not look directly at them. Pay attention to Patience's ears. The castle gates will open. Ride through the gates into the courtyard. The well is located in the center of the courtyard. Dismount, but do not tether Patience. She will wait for you. Approach the well. You will hear various sounds coming from it. Voices, music, and laughter. These are echoes of the castle's history. They are harmless. Throw the delivery bags into the well. You will not hear the bags hitting the bottom. This is normal. There will be a response from the bottom of the well. It could be talking, singing, or screaming. Don't try to understand what it's saying. Don't look into the well. Return to Patience immediately. She will gallop back to the barn. Hold on tight and don't look back at the castle. If you see lights on in the castle windows, ride faster. The barn and stables are behind a door I hadn't noticed before, marked only by a small horseshoe. The air inside smells of hay and horses, a surprisingly normal, almost comforting scent. There are 4 horses in the stable, but only one is gray. As I approach Patience, she looks at me with her deep, intelligent eyes. I open her stable door, and she neighs softly, pressing her nose against my chest as if in sympathy. "You've done this before, haven't you, young lady?" I whisper. She hums, seemingly in agreement. The offering was simple, a covered pot radiating warmth and the aroma of herbs and meat. Whatever was inside, it was for someone who still preferred a hot stew. The trail began, as described in the brochure, as a narrow dirt road winding into the dense forest behind the warehouse. As soon as Patience stepped onto this path, the city lights went out, and we were surrounded by thick trees, unable to see even the stars. Patience moved with steady steps, her hooves softly pressed down on the soft earth. My gaze remained fixed on her ears, watching them turn, listening to the sounds of the surrounding forest. 10 minutes into the ride, the first sound came. "Eric?" It was my mother's voice. My mother, who had died of cancer 2 years ago. "Eric, baby, where are you going? Come here. I miss you so much." My eyes welled with tears, but I kept my gaze focused on the horse's ears. The voice came from the depths of the woods to my left. "Please, Eric, don't you want to see me one last time? I'm right here. Look at me, just once." Precious pressed her ear to my head and quickened her pace to a jog.
The voice followed us, growing more desperate and more urgent. "You left me to die! You weren't there when I needed you! You should at least look at me!" These accusations pierced my heart like knives, because some of them were true. I had missed the last few days of her life. I hadn't returned until the very last week, stuck in another state, working a job I was going to lose anyway. Guilt gnawed at me like a living, breathing thing. But I didn't look at her.
Other voices joined my mother's, my ex-girlfriend, my high school best friend who had moved away, and my father, whom I hadn't heard from in 5 years. They were all calling to me from the darkness, some pleading, some accusing, and some just sobbing in pain. Patience started to jog, and I gripped the reins tightly, burying my face in her mane, trying to block out the voices. I glimpsed figures moving through the woods, their gait unsteady, their limbs clumsy, and their faces slightly elongated. Thank goodness the forest had finally come to an end and we had reached the clearing. The castle stood before us like a decayed tooth. 3 of its 4 towers had collapsed and ivy completely covered the walls, as if the forest were slowly swallowing it up. But as the brochure had said, the gates were open, the rusty iron doors twisted into various shapes. We entered the courtyard, our pace gradually slowing. Moonlight filled the courtyard, bright enough to cast clear shadows. The well, a circular stone structure with an iron roof, stood in the center of the courtyard.
I dismounted, my legs trembling, and carried the delivery bag toward the well. Before I even reached it, sounds rang out. I was already halfway there. First came laughter, the elegant, clear laughter of nobles at a banquet. Then music, a string quartet playing a complex Baroque piece. People spoke languages I couldn't understand, their voices mingling and overlapping. The sound of horses' hooves on pebbles, the cries of children, women singing lullabies, men shouting commands, the clanging of swords, someone praying in Latin. It was as if all the sounds that had ever occurred in this place were simultaneously emanating from the well, compressed, superimposed, merging into a chaotic symphony. It should have been unbearable, but for some reason, it wasn't. It was almost beautiful. I walked to the well and held the delivery bag to the opening. The well was pitch black, as if a void was pulling at my eyes, forcing me to look deeper. I released the bag. There was no sound of the bag falling to the bottom. It was as if the echoes of history were playing back, growing louder and more frantic. Then a voice answered me.
A voice from the abyss, speaking in ancient language. It wasn't speaking to me, it was speaking through me, and I could feel its sound vibrating in the soft tissues of my bones, teeth, and internal organs. Its meaning, it passed through my consciousness, reaching a primal part of my brain, a place that understands hunger, darkness, and the patience of those who live forever in the abyss. It was saying, "Thank you." I ran back to Patience, and out of pure fear, I smoothly mounted her. She needed no urging, turned, and charged toward the gate, her hooves sparking on the cobblestones. As we galloped through the gates, I made a mistake. I glanced back. Every window in the castle was filled with light. Candles, torches, the whole building radiated a warm glow, brimming with life and celebration. I could see shadows moving behind the glass. People were dancing and dining. In the highest window of the last remaining tower, a figure watched us. It was incredibly tall, and even from this distance, I could see its head was oddly shaped, too narrow, too long, and wearing something on its head, like antlers. It raised an arm, as if waving, or perhaps offering a blessing. Patience galloped faster than any horse I'd ever seen before, the forest on either side fading into a blur of darkness. We only slowed down when we saw the lights of a warehouse ahead. I'd just dismounted when my phone buzzed. $134.50 has been deposited into your account. Before the theater delivery, I'd done 2 months of normal deliveries, or rather, the normality of the job. An order was left on a doorstep.
No one answered, but the door opened automatically 30 seconds after I left. A midnight delivery to a cemetery, placed on a specific tombstone with singing in the distance. A package was handed to a taxi driver who didn't say a word. I looked at him for 5 seconds and couldn't remember what he looked like. But all of that was manageable. Terrifying, but manageable.
The Theater District subway station, Platform 7. 2:30 a.m. phone buzzing. The Theater District subway station has 6 platforms. Platform 7 is only open between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. You must complete a delivery within this time frame. Enter to the main entrance on 7th Street. Station staff will not assist you. This is normal. Purchase a token from the machine. Tokens are required. Debit cards are not accepted. The machine only accepts cash. Insert exactly $2.75. Go down to Platform 1. Walk to the end, which is at the tunnel entrance. There is a door marked Employee Only, Platform 7. This door will be open during delivery hours. The stairs behind this door are deeper than usual. Count the steps. If there are more than 127, you've gone too far. Return to the top and start again.
Platform 7 is empty. It is always empty. If you see anyone else on Platform 7, leave immediately and report to the dispatch center. Do not deliver goods. Walk to the center of the platform. You will see a bench that is different from the other station furniture. It is older, ornately decorated, made of dark wood, and it has brass fittings. Place your delivery items on this bench. A train will arrive in 3 minutes. This train is not on the timetable and is not a regular subway train. There may be passengers in the carriage. Do not make eye contact with anyone in the carriage. If they talk to you or gesture to you, do not respond. The doors will not open. This is intentional. Passengers will take packages from the bench in some unknown method. You do not need to know the specific method. After the train departs, wait a full 60 seconds, then return the way you came. Do not run. Running will attract attention. Delivery man JM's tip: trains sometimes stop at the wrong spot. If the door coincides with where you are standing, close your eyes and count to 30. Don't open your eyes, no matter what you hear or feel. Delivery man DR's tip: I heard someone calling my name in the train car. I accidentally responded. 3 days later, I heard the same sound coming from my closet. I moved. I suggest you strictly follow the rules.
The package was a white cardboard box, sealed with red tape. It was heavier than it looked, and the contents made a wet, slippery sound when I picked it up. The box was cold, colder than a warehouse freezer. At this time, the subway station was deserted, save for the buzzing and flashing fluorescent lights. The ticket booth attendant was an old man reading a newspaper, and as the pamphlet said, his gaze never left the paper as I passed. The automatic ticket machine mechanically swallowed my banknotes and spat out a brass token that looked like it came from another era. The metal was warm in my palm. Platform 1 was deserted, the tiles gleaming under the glaring lights. I walked towards the end of the tunnel, my footsteps echoing, each echo accompanied by a new sound. Another set of footsteps, slightly out of sync with mine, coming from a direction I couldn't discern. A door marked Employees Only, Platform 7, stood out starkly against the concrete and steel of the station, for it was made of wood. The wood was a deep, almost black color, carved with symbols that were almost unbearable to look at. Behind the door, a spiral staircase descended, the walls on either side pressed tightly against the floor. I counted each step aloud, my voice weak, swallowed by the enclosed space. 27, 28, 29. The air grew colder and more oppressive, carrying the smell of metal and electricity. 63, 64, 65. I heard music coming from above or below. I thought jazz, the kind played in underground bars during Prohibition. 99, 100, 101. My phone died at step 112, plunging me into darkness with only the intermitting flashing of the emergency light. 123, 124, 125, 126, 127.
The bottom door was modern, like other emergency exits in the subway system. I pushed it open. Something was off about platform 7, but it wasn't immediately obvious. Its dimensions were wrong, too long and too narrow, the ceiling too high. The color of the tiles on the walls was wrong too, a deep burgundy that no urban planner would approve. And it was eerily silent, as if the platform were in a mysterious space where sound couldn't travel normally. The bench was in the center of the platform, just as described. It had a rustic beauty, like furniture in a mansion, not a subway station. The brass fittings gleamed, and the wood was intricately carved with patterns. I thought they resembled vines, or perhaps snakes. I placed the white box on the bench and stepped back. The wait was agonizing. My watch showed 2:34 a.m. I still had time, plenty of time before the delivery deadline, but every second felt like an hour. The silence was oppressive, making my eardrums ache. I began to perceive my breathing and heartbeat with unusual clarity. At 2:37 a.m., I felt it first, then heard it, a vibration in the air, the change in air pressure making my ears ring. Then came the sound, the distinctive rumble of an approaching train. The train emerging from the tunnel wasn't modern. It was old, incredibly old, like a relic from the early days of the subway. The carriages were made of dark wood and brass, bathed in warm yellow light. Through the windows, I could see the passengers. My blood froze instantly. The passengers were dressed in clothing from different eras. A woman wore a 1920s-style modern dress. A man wore a Victorian-era suit. A child wore tattered clothes from the Great Depression. A soldier wore a World War II uniform. They sat or stood, swaying slightly with the train's movement, each staring intently at me. Something was off about their expressions. Not obviously, not in a way I could articulate, but something felt off. Their proportions, their expressions, even the rhythm of their blinks. The train slowed, slower and slower. For a moment, I even thought it would stop right in front of me, the doors right in front of me. Just as I was about to cover my eyes, the train suddenly moved forward 3 feet and stopped. The doors didn't open, but passengers by the windows pressed their hands against the glass, their handprints condensing into fog on the cold surface. Some laughed, others stared intently out the window, their gazes focused and heavy. The feeling sent chills down my spine. In the car closest to me, a woman mouthed something to me. I couldn't hear her through the glass, but I could read her lips. "Can you hear me?" I turned my face away, my gaze fixed on the floor, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Something was knocking on the window, a rapid, urgent knock, as if trying to get my attention. I didn't turn around. More knocking came from several windows, the intermittent rhythm sounding almost like Morse code. Then came voices, somewhat muffled through the glass but still clearly audible, all at once. "Look at us. We just want to talk. Don't be so rude. Eric? Eric, is that you?" The last voice made me shudder. It sounded like my mother's voice again, but distorted, as if coming from a broken speaker. "Eric, darling, I'm right here. I've been waiting for you. Look at me, just this once, please." I tried not to look up, my eyes burning. I silently counted down the seconds, trying to block out the sounds. The white box on the bench was gone. I didn't see it disappear, I didn't hear it, it was just gone. The sound stopped abruptly. The train jerked off slowly at first, then gradually accelerating until it disappeared into the tunnel on the other side of the platform. The rumble faded into the distance, and I was once again alone in absolute silence. I counted to 60, each number feeling like a small victory. Then I walked, not running, though my instinct screamed at me to sprint back to the door, up the 127 steps, across the station, and into the city night where the air had never tasted so sweet. I had just reached the ground when my phone rang. $203.75 has been deposited into your account. I probably have 1 or 2 more stories to tell, but more orders have come in, so I'll be back. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Which story was your favorite? Personally, mine was the Scarecrow one.
See you in the next one.